Well, Darren, it was a pretty good opening weekend of the Six Nations this weekend. Ireland take on France. Who do you fancy?
Wee bit concerned about the French this year. Like they're good. Ireland, do you know what? Everyone talks about momentum in the Six Nations, but you can see it now because you lose to Wales when you could have won. And now you're playing a really good French team in Dublin. We've seen that home advantage isn't counting for as much. You have to go to Scotland, who look pretty good at the minute. Don't think we've too much to worry about with the Italians yet. And then by round 5, I'd say the English are going to be smarting. So I'm not to be pessimistic, but I think this is going to be a tough run for Ireland.
And a couple of big selection calls there. Billy Burns and Jamison Gibson Park in there. It's good to see a bit of change though as well, isn't it?
Yeah, and it was interesting watching the Andy Farrell press conference. He must be very frustrating for the media because he just answers all the questions so well. Anytime he got asked about Billy Burns' mistake or Peter O'Mahony's mistake, he just completely brings it back to the team. He doesn't, he was asked about what did he say to Billy Burns after the game, and he just straight away said, look, I've had loads of conversations with Billy. I speak to all the players the whole way through the week. I wasn't that surprised, to be honest with you. I mean, this is 2021. This is the era of, the scapegoat. People want to, everyone who's not from Munster wants to blame Peter O'Mahony, and everyone, who's not from Ulster wants to blame Billy Burns. That's kind of because the provinces are so partisan. There's always a wee bit of that on social media after, and you could go through that game, and Ireland had loads of opportunities to win it. I wasn't overly surprised to see the team six selection. I think the scrum half one, it's wide open. I mean, it's probably the one area where you really have, to see Casey come in on the bench. He's been brilliant for Munster, obviously. Gibson Park, he starts as many games for Leinster as he's on the bench. So there's probably question marks in Dublin. Is he the best the best scrum half in Leinster, And then I know the Ulster fans love getting their back up about John Cooney, and Kieran Marmion's played some great stuff. So there's a serious amount of scrum halves about. All in all, I don't think I was that surprised when I saw the team, given we found out afterwards who was unavailable.
Gibson Park, he seems to get the ball away from the base very quickly, doesn't he?
Yeah, there's a serious tempo to the way he plays. I do think a couple of times he's played in the game has quite suited him. In the end of the day, there has been times when people have got on Conor Murray's back about not getting the ball away, and the ball's not there to be point being as something about Gibson Park and the speed of play. And the likes of James Lowe, I do think there's a wee bit of sort of X factor about him, which at Ireland I think they need, and I very much welcome. Just the ability to, when the game gets loose and when it does break up, Gibson Park seems to get there very, very quickly. The ball's on a plate, he picks it, runs, and he causes a lot of problems. So I think it's going to be really different for Ireland. In the end of the day, I think we were always going to struggle to win the championship. So is it a bad thing that we have a halfback pairing playing like this in a big game? Probably not, because I personally still am unsure about Ireland's halfback pairing at the World Cup. So here's an opportunity for another couple of guys. You've
played with Billy Burns. Is he the sort of lad to just park that mistake and go and have a blinder on Sunday?
Yeah, probably, yeah, and it is a lot harder, as I said, in 2021 because of the way social media is, and I just hope he's had the cop on to delete it. And listen, there's no doubt it was a bad mistake, but it's amazing how that then changes people's opinion of how he played last week, and then the narrative turned to how he really didn't play well, and sure, he kicked that ball out in the full. And I was kind of like, listen, if you want to try and manipulate it that way, I actually thought he looked really at home in international rugby. Yeah, people are going to say I'm biased. He did kick the ball out in the full, but he was trying something different. Ireland kept the ball for their ball retention. That game was phenomenal, and their lack of kind of penetration and creativity was also phenomenal. Having said that, when you have 14 men, like the game is about finding 2v1s either on the edge or through the middle. So it was always going to be hard. So the fact that he came on, he changed it up. He tried a wee bit of, chip through or a crossfield kick, didn't come off. And then the narrative turned to how he'd had this sort of shocker of a game. And to be honest with you, I just call me one-eyed, but I just did not see it at all. I don't think it was that long ago that Ireland were looking absolutely and utterly clueless at Twickenham. And the narrative was, flip, did you see how Billy Burns came on and a wee bit of creative kicking caused a try for Stockdale, and maybe Ireland need that in their attack, because when Ross Byrne was playing, it looked like this. And the truth in that game was probably that Ross Byrne was on a hiding to nothing, because Ireland got dominated that day. So I'm a big fan of Billy Burns. I think he's brilliant, and I think he's a real leader and he's a real commander, the way he organises. So I think he's going to go well for Ireland, not only this week but for the next few years.
He does like to play pretty flat, doesn't he? Which is good if you're outside him as a back.
Yeah, I mean, for the year or two I played with him, I absolutely loved playing outside him. I say he's so organised, gets flat, but transfers the ball very quickly. So like, you don't want a 9 or 10 who's really flat and they take a lot out of the ball and they're slow to get it across the chest and get it in your hands, because then you end up getting smashed. But when he stands flat, it engages people, it interests people, but he's able to transfer it so quickly. So he has a few similarities to Sexton in that he probably doesn't have the athletic prowess to have a strong running game, but because he understands the game so well and he manipulates things so well, he actually goes all right ball in hand. And I always thought that about Sexton. The guy's like, he's not a power athlete, he's not quick, but he actually goes all right when those wraparound plays and he gets those second touches. So listen, I'm probably biased, but I'm a big fan of his, and I wasn't really surprised to see that, he made a bad mistake. But does that undo what he's done for Ulster, for Ireland, and in training camps over the past few years? Like, of course it doesn't.
Moving on to the French. Dupont at 9. World's best 9 for you at the moment, is he?
Yeah, it's serious, isn't it? He's so good that Aaron Smith was kissing his ass on, was it Instagram or Twitter? That's when when you got to start in All Blacks talking about how good you were. Like,
it's quite interesting that from Smith, because to me, he still gets the ball from the base the quickest. If you want quick ball, he's still quicker than him. But he's obviously singing his praises, which is a big accolade, isn't it?
Yeah, but Dupont, I don't know what it is about what the guy does. Obviously, I've seen quite a lot of them with Toulouse. Who played Ulster a few times recently, in particular, and he just is so influential. I can't really put my finger on what it is. There's probably scrum halves that are faster. There's probably scrum halves that better get the ball a bit quicker, have a better kicking game. But that guy is just causing mayhem at the minute. And you know what? It's really, really good to watch. So I think Ireland, yeah. Listen, it's good. It's not good for Ireland. It's really good for the championship to have France back to where they were, because France for the last sort of decade there, just it wasn't so long ago France were winning Grand Slams all over the place. And then, for that last decade in the Joe Schmidt era, you would laugh at a French team coming into town and you'll beat them in Paris plenty. That's not the sort of France of old. So from a neutral's point of view, it's class to see them back to that level. And from an Ireland point of view, it's dangerous. I just think, and I think people have been quite critical of Andy Farrell and the Andy Farrell era. I definitely think that's a little harsh. I think he's tried to play a few players in the Autumn Nations Cup. He's tried to figure out his best team. He's kind of struggled because if you look back to the November and the end of the Six Nations and the Autumn Nations Cup, other than the likes of Keenan and Doris who'd have come through, the ones that really put their hands up were probably at that stage, the halfbacks, guys who were the most established players who people were saying, probably time for Murray to start moving on. A lot of chat about John Cooney. Sexton's not going to make it to the World Cup. Keith Earls is another guy who people were dying to write off. And he was one of the guys I felt that really put his hand up back in November to say, look, I'm here for another couple of years. So, I just think Ireland are in a slightly different place to France and England in particular in terms of their cycle, where they're at as a team.
If they are to win, what type of attack do you think will damage the French?
I think Ireland's attack is a conversation that I find quite interesting at the minute, because there's been so much talk post Joe Schmidt about the change. And it's like players now have freedom. Players are now allowed to make decisions. Players are now allowed to offload the ball. And I think because Joe Schmidt left with an underwhelming World Cup, I feel like we're very, very quick to forget how good Ireland were under him. And I do think they were very pragmatic in how they attacked. But I don't have the stats in front of me, nor have I looked. But if you looked at Ireland under the Joe Schmidt era, it's probably Ireland's best. It's Ireland's best team ever, in my opinion, second in the world, and it's probably their best attacking team ever. If you look at points per game and tries per game, so a lot was made about this new brand of attack, and there's more decisions to make, and players aren't in straight jackets, and players love being in camp, and it's very, very strange every time you listen to a press conference. Keith Earls was talking about it today, about the new freedom, and you've seen it in our attack. And I was kind of sitting listening to him going, I mean, maybe I'm deluded. I'm just not seeing this revolutionized Ireland attack that the players and the management are talking about in press conferences. I am not watching Ireland in the Andy Farrell era saying this is a markedly, there's more offloads, there's more passes, there's more freedom, there's more beautiful rugby. It's a pleasure to watch, as if the Joe Schmidt era was a chore. I'm just and I said I could be completely wrong, but for me, I haven't seen this like flamboyant, incredibly attacking rugby that they seem to be talking about, if that makes sense.
And defensively, James Lowe was caught out against Wales. What do you mean? He's obviously, as you say, an X factor in attack, but would it be fair to say defensively he needs to be careful, and it is something he needs to work on?
It's a tough one, because I thought that, like, he obviously made a mistake for that Rhys Sammet try. I also want to be fair to him in that, before that clip, and again, I don't analyze his game every week. Before that clip, I wouldn't have said that James Lowe is a really, really poor defender. I would have said that, like, ball in hand is the strength of his game. So, I'm not too sure why at that time he's seen that picture and got that mistake wrong, and it was a costly mistake in the end. But I'm not completely, the jury is not completely out for me that James Lowe can't defend. And maybe that's sort of quite typical of me, and that I think a lot of areas are grey. I've been quite vocal in the past about how I think Jacob Stockdale gets a torrid time on social media and in the media about his defence, and people are very quick to say, oh, but he did this. And I'm not saying the guy hasn't made a mistake. I'm saying, like, do I think that, like, he can't tackle or he can't defend? Like, no. So with James Lowe, I wouldn't have said, and I would stand by that. I don't see him. I see him as an attacking-minded player, very, very hard to break down. I think that's the value he brings to Ireland, ahead of being like a really well-organised defensive winger. But I don't see it as like a huge weakness in the game. I don't see him as like, oh dear, if it gets to James Lowe's side, we're not going to be able to stop them.
Moving on to Scotland v Wales. Scots had a great win at Twickenham last Saturday. Can they back it up at Murrayfield?
It's funny, like, being Irish, it's just so good to see, and can they back it up? Yeah, I mean, I think they're favourites. I think the bookies say that, and I would probably say it as well. Again, like Ireland, I think the jury's out on Wales. Let's not forget, we didn't play that well against Wales last week. We were down a man. We've spoken at reasonable length about three. There's three of probably more that we haven't got time to talk about, of errors that could have caused Ireland to win that game. And if you look at the disruption in the Ireland team through the injuries during the game, and red cards in rugby are so costly, and to think that Ireland, hung in there and could have snuck it at the end, really, to me, shows that I'm not sold on Wales either. And that's why I think the championship's quite interesting at the minute, because for a lot of the last decade, Wales and Ireland were so strong. Scotland struggled, and then England and France were a wee bit, but now it's sort of all changed a wee bit, and Wales and Ireland are still very good teams, but I don't think they're quite as good as they were. So it's good to see Scotland, like talking about Ireland and the brand of rugby. Scotland do play a good brand of rugby. I think they've been knocking on the door for a couple of years, but it's always just been the case with like the likes of Stuart Hogg and Finn Russell. Do they just come, like international rugby is like a series of like just minutes without making stupid mistakes? That's kind of what it is. And again, I don't know why this interview's turned into me talking about Joe Schmidt, but part of the reason that Ireland were so good was it was just play 80 minutes in a row without making a mistake and being really pragmatic, and it's effective. And Scotland, you always felt like it was really close, but then they couldn't resist trying to run from their own 22, giving away a penalty, and then someone would kick to the corner and drive them over. But now they seem to be getting there. Obviously, the way Watson played last week, he's a joy to watch as well. They're just a really, really good team to watch, and I'm confident for them, and I think it's going to be a belter of a game.
It's pretty big. They won last week, and Finn Russell, he wasn't exactly at his best, so that's another great sign for them, isn't it?
Yeah, and he spent some time in Simbin as well, and I suppose, me talking about this Scottish brilliance and the flair, but they kind of just ground it out last week, didn't they? It was ugly. If there was ever sort of an England-Scotland meeting that you said that England would beat Scotland, I probably would have said was at Twickenham in conditions like that, because albeit, a lot of the Saracens players hadn't played in a while. Yeah, we get it. But England, just you think back to that game against Ireland at Twickenham, and I think it was the Autumn Nations Cup, late November, early December maybe, and England just so powerful. So if you'd have said to me that Scotland were going to go down to Twickenham in the sort of sloppy weather and put one over England, I would have said absolutely no chance. So listen, it's good to see. It's healthy. I backed England for the championship before that game, so shows how much I know.
What about that? England win the Nations Cup there in the autumn, then they lose their first match, and immediately everyone's like, maybe Farrell needs to get dropped. And you're sort of thinking, is it really not? It's one game, surely. And like, you'd probably hate to be an Italian player on Saturday, because you're going to get a backlash. You
really are. And again, with England, it's very, very strange, because I think back to that Ireland game, and I remember watching it thinking, I don't know how, as an Irish fan, I don't really know how to feel here, because I felt like we were so well beaten. But I remember the scoreline was only 7 to 10 points. And I remember thinking, should we be, disappointed that we've gone and been so well beaten by England? Or should we be happy that really we went over to England, we played dreadfully, and we hung in there, and it was actually quite a close game? And if you think back, Ireland had a few opportunities to win that game, which just seems mental. So, from an English point of view, it was like, are we content that we're, so much better than Ireland at the minute? Or are we a little concerned that we can exert so much dominance and not really score any points? So I definitely think you're right. I think Italy are in big trouble. I still think there's enough about England with their attack and how, when they do get flow to it, and their power game, and that they'll come good. And I do think that they and France are the two best teams in the Six Nations at the minute. What do you make of the whole England kicking? Are you for it or against it? Or is it, if you kick well, it's a good ploy, and if you kick badly, you shouldn't do it? It's an interesting debate, because I saw a clip going around Twitter last week. It was a screen grab of England, and it was like, this is what happens when you're a kick first team. It was probably your analysis, knowing how good your detail is. It was 73, wasn't it? Yeah, and it was interesting. Normally I would be a wee bit blasé about those things, whatever. But it's an interesting point. It's 7v3. Why is the ball not going through the hands? And it's not. I actually think the ball's kicked in the opposition half, so you're over halfway line. And it was interesting when I read it. This is how a kick. This is what happens when you have a kick first mentality. Because it is a huge part of rugby, kicking well, international rugby. It's honestly, it's the majority of the game, outside of set piece. But the key is that you're playing space, And a lot of the time in international rugby, the space is manipulated by the kicking game, not the other way around. And so if the space is on the edge, you don't kick it to 3 players in the backfield. You got to play space. It's something that I always remember playing when I was playing for Ulster against Leinster. I always felt Leinster were really, really good at that. Off like a midfield scrum, you'd have Rob Kearney on one side and Johnny Sexton on the other side. And, you know, you have 2 kicking options and like you just can't defend all the space. And they were very good at saying, right, well, if you put an extra player over here, then we have space here. Or they would just set up, watch what you do, and then take the space. If you load the front line, they'll plonk it in behind. And that's kind of how it works. But if you are not a space first team, if you're a kick first team, that's the consequence of it. So, I mean, to answer your question, I probably would have been a little bit, I'm not sure that this is as bad as people think. And then I saw that clip, and I know it's one instance, but it did make me change my thinking a lot. That like, yeah, listen, I don't coach, so, you know, who am I to be talking about it? But you got to play space, and if the space is in behind, then you kick. If the space is on the edge, you play to the edge. If the space is through the middle, you go through the middle. But the game's about space.
And finally, what are you predicting this weekend? Give us your 3 winners and why.
I think England will win because I still think that I wouldn't be on the Bag Italy bandwagon. I think they actually are improving. I just think we're not seeing it because I think the Six Nations is at, if you look outside of Italy, I don't think the Six Nations has ever been higher quality. So I do think Italy are improving. I think their problem is everyone else is still improving faster than them. Yeah. So the gap's not getting smaller. So I still think they're going to struggle. I agree with you. I think England are going to go to town on them. And then I am going to back Scotland at home. And then I just think with changes and just with my question marks about Ireland, and I think France are the new favourites for the championship. So home advantage not playing as big a part. I think, unfortunately, the French are going to beat us.
The Guinness Six Nations Championship, live on Virgin Media One and Virgin Media Player.